police gunfire at scene 2, SABC has been able to provide clear detail of only 2 people, C and N, possibly also some detail in respect of A and B. And that leaves 14 people who were killed by police gunfire, in respect of which, at least in the presentation, there's no explanation for the circumstances in which these people were killed. Are you aware of any explanation for anybody other than victims A, B, N, or C?
No. As I say, I'm not sure if the members have mentioned it in detailed statements at all, but I would expect that them specifically stating who they'd shot, they may have felt that they were incriminating themselves. As I say, but we only placed in here what we were spoken to or told.
So you were given no versions for the killing of 14 of 18 people at scene 2?
Well, let's put it this way. If there was no police official that put his hand in the air and said, I specifically killed this person, other than I think maybe some of those that you've mentioned. No.
Complicated than that. I could understand you could have a situation where a policeman or police member says, I fired, shot someone who fell down and went over to me, he was dead. I can understand that. That would be a clear case where that member knows or should know that he killed someone and actually know who he killed because he will know where it was. But there could also be cases, I suppose, where shots were fired into the bushes, as it were.
Yes.
And people were found dead. But a number of shots were fired in that direction by a number of people. And in the absence of ballistic evidence linking dead body to the firearm, it's not possible to say who was responsible. But one could say, I suppose, dead body found at this particular spot in the bushes. The people who fired there were members ABC. So they would be the group from which one could say the fatal shot was fired, although it may not be possible to identify which of them did it. Now, I understood you to say no one put his hand up and said, I fired, talking about the 14 now, I fired the shot that killed one of the 14. But were there no cases where it was possible to establish with perhaps lesser degree of precision, but nevertheless
arrive at those conclusions.
The question I ask is, was there no evidence of that kind? If the answer is there was no evidence of that kind, well, then that's the end of it.
Chairperson, as I say, I've been to scene 2, where we did a very informal reconstruction, told people to go and stand where they were positioned and asked them just to explain to us. But it's not a, as we've said, a scientific process or, so.
Of course, there is the other possibility, which my colleague Commissioner Hemraj points out, that there were some people who were shot by friendly fire. You know, there was policemen on the eastern side of the hill fired, and the bullet may have gone to the western side. So people actually fired from near the western side into a particular bush. They mightn't be the only people who fired, because it may have been a policeman who fired from further away. That's another possibility, which makes it even more complicated.
Yes.
Colonel, I want to move on to one last topic about in relation to the implementation of the plan, and I should probably have dealt with it earlier when we were dealing with the rollout of the barbed wire, because it takes us back to scene 1 and what happened there. But you'll recall we discussed the rollout of the barbed wire, and that your plan was that it should have taken 2 minutes to roll out simultaneously. That was changed on the ground to a sequential rollout, and sometime after 7 minutes after the rollout started, there was an attempt by the strikers to breach the police line. Now, I put to you this morning that if the rollout had been implemented as you had imagined it would have been implemented, or you had intended it should have been implemented, we wouldn't have had scene 1. I now want to look at what happened having regard to the rollout of the barbed wire that actually took place. And you recall that what SABC have described as Incident 1 is alleged to have taken place just when Nyala 4 started rolling out the barbed wire.
Yes.
And then what SABC have described as Incident 2 took place a little while later, but was thwarted by Nyala 4 accelerating with the barbed wire to the kraal.
Yes.
Now, when we reconvene on Thursday, I'll deal with incidents 1 and 2 and the SAP's description of them in the presentation in some detail, because we have difficulties with that. But for present purposes, that's the SAP's version. Now, I want to put to you that even after the protesters had attempted to breach the police line, and after they'd been cut off by Nyala 4, there was still a possibility through appropriate operational command to stop scene 1. And for that purpose, I would like you to look at a document which we will hand in as J 109.1. J 109.1. And
How do I describe it?
it's a plan of scene 1 prepared by the South African Human Rights Commission with the position of all SAP's vehicles at the time of the scene 1 shootings. And I speak subject to correction by my learned friend, but as I understand it, SAPS accepts that the position of the vehicle, SAPS broadly accepts this document. It accepts that the positions of the vehicles are correct, and it has minor quibbles with the identification of one or two of the vehicles. I think it's one, when I say one or two, I don't mean it in a in a figurative sense, I mean it in a literal sense. It's either one or two.
Yeah, just small, the SDF vehicle at the top of the picture, behind the red line, I don't think was positioned there. I think it was positioned to the far, as we look at the line, or the photograph, the far right, not necessarily behind the line. I know that I think it was Captain Lust's white vehicle was parked more or less in line with the direction that the strikers were moving between the kraal and the vehicles. As we see, there were two policemen to the front of that vehicle, one of which is shouting ceasefire. But in general, I accept that as you say, that the positionings otherwise are correct.
If we go back, if we go back for a moment to slide 194 of the presentation. That's the slide of Nyala 4 making for the west corner of the kraal. That slide is taken at ETV time 15:51:47, 15:51:47. The shootings took place more than 2 minutes later at 15:53:50. And what I want to put to you is that once Nyala 4 reached the corner of the kraal and had cut off the mine workers on the western edge of the kraal, Brigadier Carlitz had 2 minutes to block the gap on the eastern edge of the kraal as the miners moved clockwise round the kraal, broadly in the direction of your red arrow on this diagram. 2 minutes. You accept that's correct?
It sounds a bit slow from what I've picked up, from what the commanders on ground were saying. What you're literally saying is from there until they came around was 2 minutes.
From there until the shootings was 2 minutes.
No, Chair. Again, I don't know whether this is a witness to be testifying on events to which he was not present. But also, I don't understand where the counting starts off. Is it at the point that they are now at the front of the gate, or does he know that they are coming there? All of these things are hypotheses that must be tested with the right witnesses.
Chairperson, we have an agreed document that sets out the time reconciliation between different cameras and also the time of the shooting.
Did I understand you to say that Nyala 4 got to the, would it be the southwestern corners of the kraal? Which corner of the kraal? The southwestern corner of the kraal at a time which is according to the agreed timetable, as it were. It was 2 minutes before the shooting began. Is that what you're putting?
I'm saying this shot that we see is 2 minutes and 3 seconds before the shooting, according to the green timetable.
The shot that we now see.
The shot that we now see, and that I don't have. I can bring the photograph from one of those CCTV cameras and give you an exact point at which Nyala 4 gets to the kraal. But it's going to be, if it's not 2 minutes, it's going to be 1 minute 58 seconds. I can bring that tomorrow. It may well be. It may well be
tomorrow. You won't find anybody here, but I'm sure the cleaners and the janitors here will be. The action taken is twofold. Firstly, there was a lack of clarity in what precisely you were putting in relation to the timetable, which you may well have cleared up now. But the second point relates to the question of whether this is the appropriate witness to ask this question of. That's your objection, Mr. Smith.
And to that is to say Brigadier Khalid had so many minutes to close it. He must have known that's where they're going, to make use of any knowledge of that kind.
That I can put to this witness, Chairperson, because I can put to this witness what the logic of his plan was in terms of creating a barricade between the strikers and the police, and what the only gap that was left for the strikers to pass through to reach the police.
To put it, a general abstract question, as it were, relating to the time available on the plan to be implemented. But I think we can leave Brigadier Khalid out of it for the time being, because it's not relevant, directly relevant to the point you make.
Indeed, Chairperson. If we can go back to J 109.1. Now, Colonel, would you agree that once Nyala 4 has reached the southwestern edge of the kraal, the only remaining gap for the strikers to come into the police safe zone is that narrow channel between the eastern edge of the kraal and the fence that is marked in white on this diagram?
Yes.
Do you know how wide that gap is?
No. I can estimate it, but I'm sure you've measured it.
We don't have to rely on his estimation. It's something that can be scientifically ascertained.
We've measured it on Google Earth. We haven't gone out and pasted it.
Well, Chairperson, if it makes any difference, I've repeatedly suggested, and the Chairperson called it Mpofu paces, that I had paced it, and it was about 20 paces.
Well, what that,
20 Mpofu paces is how many yards?
what that tells us is Mr. Mpofu probably strides a little longer than a meter, because Google Earth has that gap at its narrowest point as 23 meters, just under 23 meters.
I can live with that, Chairperson.
Chair, I really must raise this objection. Brigadier Khalid says in his statement, there was no option to close that gap because I would be having some of my members the other wrong side of the crowd, and I would have exposed them to danger. So a hypothesis that seeks to say it could and should have been closed is inconsistent with the evidence.
Imagine the way forward is let us let Mr. Chaskerson establish the facts in the sense of the time that was available, whether something should have been done in that time, whether there are reasons why it wasn't done, are matters that can be dealt with later. But obviously, this witness can't deal with that aspect anyway. But, so,
With respect, Chairperson, I think this witness...
Find space to proceed, Mr. Chaskerson.
Well, I think this witness can deal...
23 meters, in fact.
23 meters. Now, that gap of 23 meters, do you know how many Nyalas lined up lengthwise would block that gap?
I would estimate possibly more than 4. With a Nyala, I would estimate being at about 5 meters in length. So you'd probably need 5.
And if we look at that sketch plan, we see that there are well more than 5 Nyalas lined up, creating almost a concentric semicircle around the kraal.
I see that, and if I can speak on what I've heard, the strategy was to be from numerous of the commanders on the ground, that they were going out to line abreast. But the place to do that they had identified, and it was possibly in the time frame you were talking about, was around the kraal, just outside of the kraal, to try and block.
Well, we'll hear from Brigadier Khalid in due course, but My learned friend suggested that it wouldn't have been possible to block that off because that would have cut off the members from support. You said that's what Brigadier Carlitz will say.
But it depends what type of blocking you're talking. If you're talking simply blocking with the vehicles themselves, it's different to trying to get out and deploy the next razor wire with a perceived threat that's meters away from you.
Indeed. So blocking with vehicles.
Got his group, or I've been Pitsy, one of the two, who got his group together and had that strategy in mind to go forward and to form a blockade with his vehicles. I think it was from the north of the kraal, more or less in a line moving to the north.
Now this snapshot that we see in this scene, it's not a snapshot of a moving process. In fact, that configuration of vehicles was static and had been more or less stationary, maybe with one or two exceptions for at least 15 seconds. Will you accept that?
Well, looking at the video footage which was taken by the open source media, at the time of the shooting you can still see the last vehicle still coming into position. I'm not sure if they were waiting for that vehicle as one of them to go forward. So again, I can't speak to what the strategy was or what the commanders were thinking at the time. But I do know that at the time of the shooting, I think that's what catches one of the public order members by surprise, is that he's walking behind the Nyala. When the Nyala moves out of view, he's confronted with the approaching strikers.
Yes. The fence that we see there, it's a fence that will stop pedestrian traffic. You accept that?
Is it the 3-wire?
It's a barbed wire fence with wooden poles.
Well, I think sometimes these fences are put up there as a demarcation of this is a marked area. But if you're going to say stop pedestrian traffic, if it's a 3-wired fence, for instance, you can climb through that quite easily. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just stating that if your intention is to go there, you're going to go there.
Yes, but you can't have a crowd charging through that fence.
Not in that context, yes.
It's not the sort of fence that will stop vehicle traffic if vehicles, or armored vehicle traffic if armored vehicles need to get through it.
That's correct.
And Brigadier Carlitz himself took his own Nyala through that fence to get to the position where he was. Is that,
I believe so, yes.
I think the rest of these issues are issues for us to raise with Brigadier Carlitz. I want to move to a completely different topic now, which is what information was available to members in the JOC. And the version of SABC as we understand it is that the JOC found out about the Scene 1 shootings only at approximately 4:30. Is that a correct understanding of the version?
I don't know who actually got to hear first or who started spreading the news within the JOC. But if that's when it was said, I'm presuming the person that heard it must have been somehow considering time around that time.
I take it by 4:30 all the shooting was over, both scenes.
I think by 4:20 it was over, yes.
So my understanding of the case is put on behalf of the SAPS, if I'm wrong, Mr. Semenya will correct me, was the evidence was they only heard, I think Major Allendale, for example, only really knew about it about 4:30 after the last shot had been fired. So it doesn't really matter really whether it was 4:25 or 4:30. If you concentrate on after the last shot was fired, then I think one can move forward. Is that right, Mr. Schultz?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson. There's, in fairness to SABC, there's a slightly different version in the presentation, and maybe we can put up a slide, because the presentation refers to medics being called to scene 2, I think by 4:29.
We weren't listening to the exchange between me and the Colonel. I said, whether it's 4:25, 4:30, it doesn't really matter. What seems to be the SAP's case is that the people in the dock only became aware of what had happened at scene 1 and 2 after the last shot was fired. So if that's, and the Colonel said he understood the last shot was fired at scene 2 about 4:20. So that's what he and I were discussing. Whether that helps or hinders the way forward, you must tell me.
The last shot at scene 2 was shortly after 4:20 on the ETV clock. And the SABC version is sometime after that, the jock became aware of the fact that people had been shot at scene 1. Now, the ETV live broadcast.
Chair,
Mr. Justice, Mr. Semenya wants to.
Chair, I don't want to be pedantic. I think the evidence of General Annandale is knowing that those people have been killed, because there would have been earlier radio comments about bodies lying there.
Suggested that people were lying down to avoid being shot at.
Yes, they would have been shot, but not dead. The point I'm making is the proposition that we only came to know of the shooting after it had all happened is not quite accurate, given the fact that we were told that there were bodies lying down at an earlier stage.
I remember General Annandale said something along the lines of, they heard bodies down, and he assumed the person's bodies were down were actually lying on the ground to avoid being shot at, rather than that they'd actually being shot. But I don't know, you made the point.
Well, if the SABC case is that it knew that people had been shot at scene 1 when the
We knew there was shooting.
shooting and bodies down.
Chairperson, I was in the jock and I heard, I think it's Colonel Vermaak on the radio, and from the helicopter he was counting, literal counting, 1, 2, 3. I think it got to 16 or 20 odd. He said there's bodies lying down, something to those words, or people lying, or bodies lying on the ground, something to that effect. But understanding where the people are inside the jock at that time, we're not even aware of what's going on that this is all at scene 1. I'm trying to position this according to how I've briefed, and understanding that possibly they've gone out already and part of the approach and the dispersion action is happening. And so I think it's going to come down to, until there was a verified conversation with somebody at the front, General Annandale, myself, Brigadier Pretorius and others are going to have created their own perceptions in their minds of what was going on at the front. Because there was at no stage mentioned death, wounded, stuff like that on the radio that I heard. It was just about people lying down. It was mostly coming from the helicopter, and I wouldn't imagine from his height that he would have been able to necessarily see clearly what the condition of the people on the ground were.
Because part of the debate, I think, is about whether you knew for sure that people were killed, or whether you'd received information over the radio and so on, which would have led you to believe that it was highly probable that persons had been shot and wounded and possibly died. There's a distinction, you understand, between the two.
Yes.
Now, I can understand absolute certainty that people were dead is one thing. That presumably came later
Yes.
than the other perception which I put to you a moment ago.
Yes.
But anyway, Mr. Shasterson will take it forward, I should imagine. As long as one understands, keeps in mind the distinction, so we don't talk at cross purposes to each other.
Well, Colonel, ETV was broadcasting footage of the shootings at scene 1 from 160609, and were showing bodies in visuals which left little doubt that there had been people killed from 1606-46.
Okay.
So there was a national broadcast of apparently dead bodies at scene 1 from 1606-46. And the SABC version is that the police commanders in the JOC whose operation was being implemented only found out that people had been killed in that operation approximately 20 minutes later.
I think I must maybe just mention the TV that you may refer to was not there on the 16th. It was brought in when they saw that this is going to carry on now.
Yes, but the version goes a bit further because Brigadier Karlitz's later statement seems to suggest that he only found out about the shootings at scene 1 from the JOC. So you have the ETV viewership learning about it at 1607, the commanders in the JOC whose operation is involved learning about it 20 minutes later, and the actual operational commander himself finding out even after that. That's the SABC version. You're nodding your head.
I just, well, I can't comment on the individuals that have given the timeframes, obviously. I can speak for my own perception.
Do you have a cell phone?
I had a cell phone.
Other people in the JOC have cell phones.
Yes, they did too.
Did nobody phone in and say, what on earth's going on? We just seen this on TV?
Chairperson? No, well, no, I wasn't phoned. I think I tried to call Colonel Gaffley, who didn't answer at some stage. I think that was after I heard him shouting ceasefire. And I think he phoned me back.
Someone in the rest of the country seeing this on TV, saying, what on earth's going on there? Phoning people in the JOC saying, what's going on? He said, that didn't happen at all.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Chairperson, but I'm not sure who's all watching TV at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the afternoon necessarily. That's not
1607 on the
or
afternoon.
1607, that's not at work. Or, but I can't speak for others. I wasn't phoned.
Would you accept that it's a faintly embarrassing proposition for SABC to put, that anybody who was watching television found out that SABC had killed people 20 minutes before the commanders of the operation?
Well, SABC members on ground obviously knew. It was simply the command at the JOC that were listening to the flow of radio speech and trying to put the picture together from that.
Well, not just the command on the JOC, apparently also the commander in the field. Now, it strikes me as quite an extraordinary proposition and something one would ordinarily have expected to have to explain in this commission. Unless possibly one was trying to hide it to avoid embarrassment. You weren't trying to hide it to avoid embarrassment, were you?
No.
You personally, no.
No.
Because when we go to Exhibit L, it's striking that there is no mention at all of this extraordinary ignorance of what's taking place on the part of the JOC and Brigadier Karlitz. It's just not mentioned in Exhibit L. Is there a reason why you didn't see fit to mention it in Exhibit L?
Well, for that matter, as I said, we could have built an exhibit or a presentation of 500 slides. Where do we draw the line? And is it, at that time, the police putting forward the version that they understand? I'm not sure if Brigadier Karlitz mentioned it to us then, but whether it was seen as necessary to say that he knew that at the time. I know it's come up in cross or police experts and the parties wanting to know this now, but...
Well, you're not sure that Brigadier Karlitz mentioned it at the time. Is this not something that was raised with Brigadier Karlitz immediately by officers in the JOC? Was Brigadier, is it not something... It's not something you would have expected JOC officers to have felt quite concerned about, that the operational commander hadn't informed them that 14 people had been killed while they sat by in ignorance while an operation unfolded and another 18 were killed.
Well, I've always held the opinion what is what is, what was. And if the brigadier truly didn't know, then the fault can't be with him, but surely with somebody that was back at the scene that should have taken the time to start informing.
No, but my question went to a different issue. You said you're not sure whether Brigadier Carlitz had informed people that he didn't know at the time. Well, is that not an issue which would have been canvassed with Brigadier Carlitz immediately he returned to the jock that evening?
I don't know. I didn't debrief him or
And
ask him specifically.
And in your conversations with Brigadier Carlitz, that was never an issue that arose prior to Exhibit Elsa. It's not just Brigadier Carlitz. There's no mention of this in any of the original statements furnished to us by officers inside the jock. Nobody from inside the jock says in their statements that were furnished to us, we didn't know until after the last shot was fired. Let's go to your statement, your original statement on the 4th of September. It's FFF 18, if we can have triple F 18.
18, as far as I can see, is the 18th of October, right?
It was signed on the 18th, but it is dated for September. I think it is the correct document. It was signed on can we just go down to the signature line?
Is the type date above the signature is the 4th of September, you agree?
Yes. If we go to paragraph 33, at about 15:45, I heard over the police radio in the jock as events unfolded that the police were coming under some form of attack. Lieutenant Colonel Vermaak in the police helicopter was providing periodic situation reports as events unfolded on the ground. At about 15:55, he reported a number of protesters lying on the ground. Throughout, a lot of vehicle movement control was ordered by Brigadier Carlitz in implementing the dispersion action. Later, at about 18:30, reports came in through mine security in the jock that vehicles were being torched in the mine offices. So, what you refer to in the statement is Colonel Vermaak providing situation reports as events unfolded on the ground. Now, with the benefit of the hindsight that you had on the 4th of September 2012, what would you say was the most significant event that unfolded on the ground at Scene 1?
Scene 1 is holistically the shooting incident.
The shooting incident, the shooting incident at Scene 1. With the benefit of hindsight that you had already on 4 September,
Yeah.
you'd identify the shooting incident at Scene 1 as the most significant event that unfolded on the ground there.
But is the purpose of the statement to try not to apply hindsight to what you're admitting to know at the time?
No, I'm trying to understand why the statement was framed as it was on 4 September or possibly 18 October when you signed it. So you mention situation reports as events unfolded on the ground. You mention protesters lying on the ground, a report of protesters lying on the ground. But what you don't mention is that you and the jock didn't realize from situation reports of Colonel Vermaak and the report of bodies lying on the ground that people had actually been killed. You don't mention that.
Well, as I said, I may be shown to be wrong elsewhere, but a statement is to show what you knew at the time. and not to show what you didn't know at the time.
Yes, but this is a very important piece of information. What you didn't know at the time is very, very important, because if you did know that people had been killed at scene 1, this commission would have expected, if not from you, then certainly from commanders inside the JOC, to have taken some action that may well have prevented scene 2 from taking place. So what you knew and what you didn't know in this context was very important.
Is it not by implication, as I'm saying, because my opinion then and my opinion now of that time period as well was that hearing what I'd heard, listening to Brigadier Carlett's coordinating and ordering a public order policing instruction, my initial thoughts were never to, well, the result of a scene 1, that so many people had died, but simply to the results of a public order action. Because, and I say that because normally, if something like that has occurred, you would expect somebody at the scene to have phoned, got on the radio, or said something to the fact that, listen, we have had a major shooting, there are bodies down. And in the absence of that happening, you consider it to be a result of the public order policing action.
Again, my question goes to a slightly separate issue, which is why you didn't see fit to make clear in your original statement that you and the JOC weren't aware of what had happened at scene 1. Because when one reads this original statement, that's not the impression that's created.
I think, as I've said, to the best of how I can answer your question for you was, if it didn't happen, I didn't mention it. You know, I was there to mention what I was experiencing and felt at the time. I didn't see, when putting the statement together, that it would be important for me to state that I only after so much time got to know about that incident.
Well, we're going to get stuck in a loop here. I've put my concern about that answer to you already.
Yeah. When did you learn that there were deaths?
I can't
What
put
time?
myself to a time specifically, Chairperson, but and again, it would have been perception, because I would have been hearing Colonel Vermaak also mention 2 bodies down behind the kopje. And again, you know, one's trying to picture where he's talking about now. With the benefit of hindsight, we know it's kopje 3. Standing in the JOC, you're trying to put the mental picture together of what's happening on the outside. But I think it was possibly when Colonel Gaffrey spoke to me over the phone, or even maybe before or slightly after that, when somebody else in the JOC mentioned, listen, there's been shooting.
You see, from whom did you receive feedback when you were in the JOC? You and the other people in the JOC. You were listening on the radio, wasn't it? You could hear it, I think. From whom did you receive feedback?
Well, if it was mentioned on the radio, Chairperson, we would have, and been mentioned clearly about this is the situation, obviously we would have heard that and immediately...
From whom? My question.
Well, in the absence of the operational commander being there and knowing about it, as I say, somebody that remained at that scene should then have called it in.
No, you're not understanding. From whom did you receive feedback?
I can't recall. But as I say, it was probably somebody inside the JOC
Was it
that
only
got...
no, people outside the JOC radioing in. I understand the radio was on. You all could hear it in the JOC. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, which people, which person was heard on the radio giving feedback on what was going on?
I could hear Brigadier Carletz when he was speaking. I heard Lieutenant Colonel Vermaak, who did the majority of the talking. I heard Colonel Gaffley's voice at one stage. That's all I can definitively recall.
The reason I asked you a question is paragraph 5 of your, I think it's your second statement, Triple T 39, says this: the Commission will also note that I say nothing about the shooting incident itself, both in my original affidavit and in the supplementary affidavit. The simple reason for this is I did not witness the shooting, as I was stationed at the JOC throughout since Tuesday, 14 August 2012. The only feedback we received at the JOC in the afternoon of Thursday, 16 August 2012, was from Lieutenant Colonel Vermaak, who was in a police helicopter. The only feedback was from him. He reported simply that a number of protesters were lying on the ground. I am thus unable to assist the Commission as regards the shooting incident. It doesn't sound, in the light of what you've just told us, to be entirely accurate.
Well, feedback, Commissioner, is feedback, as in situation reports. Listening to what Brigadier Karlitz is saying, I don't recall Brigadier Karlitz ever speaking to the JOC. So we're talking feedback. The feedback reports were coming from the air. Karlitz, for that matter, was mostly directing the operation, speaking to people in his vicinity, and we were listening to that. And for that matter, I don't think that Colonel Vermaak either necessarily spoke to us, but was speaking again to people on the ground, or he quite possibly did give that report through to the JOC. I don't recall specifically.
All right. Mr. Chasson, I propose taking the adjournment now. I must tell you that this morning I indicated we will not be sitting on Friday, but my intention was to sit to the end of today and again on Thursday. We couldn't sit tomorrow because tomorrow is one of the days when the Chamber's not available. But circumstances have changed since this morning, and in the circumstances I'm going to adjourn now until Monday morning at 9 o'clock. It's not possible for us to sit on Thursday because of the circumstances which have now arisen. Mr. Mpofu.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, particularly in the light of that announcement. If the Chairperson can give me a few minutes.
The reason why I'm adjourning now is because I can't give you a few minutes. If you come and see me afterwards, I'll talk to you in my chamber.
Well, I wanted to answer your question of this morning, Chairperson. It won't take long.
No, I haven't got the time, I'm afraid, at this stage, because of the circumstances.
Of the flight.
And if you want to put something on record publicly, you can do so on Monday. We're now adjourned.
Okay.
Until Monday, 9 o'clock.
Thank you.
Interview. My first question really is, what is your reaction or your
position? So that's shortly after.
interview? My first question really is, what is your reaction or your response to yesterday's ruling that the miners should be given financing from legal aid? If you can just look at me at all times, that would be
Well,
awesome.
I'm very happy for them that they are all here. Like I've said before, we have started the race together. We have to complete the race together. I'm really, really, very happy for them that they are here. We all need closure, as you know that. And for us to get our information, we also need them. because they've contributed to that for us to get a closure. I'm so happy that they are all here, although there are still some tension amongst us, but I'm glad that they are all here, then we can continue, and the Commission will be able to continue with its work.
Okay, thank you.
And also, Aisha, you mentioned when you were requesting that they come back, you were saying, Kore, you are hoping that you'll find some closure in terms of locating what happened to your husband's body parts and all of that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you're closer to the process now to closure now that they're here?
It's true, I can't wait for
Look at me,
Mr.
sorry, just
Okay.
look at me.
All right, it's true that I can't wait for one of them, Mr. X, that is the one who said he took part in doing that, and then some of the minors, maybe if they're here, they'll be able to really tell us what happened. Yeah.
Okay, baze ngakuphi ngapha? Okay. Thathu Phatsha saqala ngawe ne.
Inkokeli
Just nje sifuna nje ukwazi ukuthi niziva njani ukuthi nibuyile nje namhlanje. Nikwazile ukuthi nifumane imali.
imali beningekho nje mina
We'll do. Sendisho ayithi buyile namhlanje beningekho commission ya so nje ukuthi nina nibuyile namhlanje commission iziva njani. Niyakholwa uba inyani izawuphuma ngokuba nikhona. Yabona.
Phatsha uzokhuluma ngaqale ngami
No, ngibacela ukuthi bame nga-1-1 or is it kind of this? Okay. Mama, ngicela ukuqala ngawe ke ngoba uthi ujaji.
Funa uyoshaya amanzi ngiyoshaya labafana.
All right. Uzojonga mna ne?
Ngizokubheka sis. Angisabi.
Ngiyazi vele. Tutu, ni right? Tebogo? Everyone fine? I need to shoot, guys. Come on. Okay, are you sorted? Can I go? Okay. Everybody, ne? Mama niziva njani uba namhlanje nikwazile ukuthi nibuye?
Sho, indlela esijabule ngayo. Kakhulu into esijabulele kuba kubhataleke amagqwetha abasebenzi. Into besiyifuna kahle yileyo. Sijabula kabi ngoba sifuna ukuva lobumenemene lobo bula. Abuphume sifuna iqiniso livele. Enethi futhi into yokuqala bayobashayela emizini yabo. Uyayiqonda? Lapha kulasihlala khona. Bakwazile ukusuka la bashiya imayini bawushaya abasebenzi bebashayela la bahlala khona. Usibhekile isibaya ubhekile umkhukhu babashayele la bahlala khona banesibindi sokuba gumbulula ematsheni phansi kwezihlahla baze bayatsho nabo bephansi kwezihlahla. Uyizwile le ndoda emhlophe bebakhiphelana ezihlahleni becashile.
Okay, ma, before uhamba ngicela igama lakho nesibongo nje.
Ngiza kunikeza ntombazana. Ngisho manje ngiunomfanelo njalo mina.
Did you get that, guys? Ngicela uphinde futhi.
Nomfanelo njalo.
Happy, everyone? Siyabonga ma. Ngicela Tata Phatsha.
nginguye ndingusiphethe kaPhatsha ndijabula kakhulu
Ngicela nje unimele kancinci nje Tata Phatsha.
okay
Everyone rolling? Can I go? Okay. Cool. Can I go, guys? Okay. Tata Phatsha niziva njani uba nibuyile namhlanje?
ndiziva ndijabule kakhulu nangona bendingekho izolo apha ePort manje namhlanje xa ndisiva kusithiwa amagqwetha wethu azawubhatalwa ndiziva ndijabule kakhulu.
And uyathemba uba xa nikhona apha ku-commission inyani izawuphuma?
Ndiyathemba uba xa sikhona apha kukomishini sinethemba imali yamagqwetha izawuphuma kangangoba sifuna iphumile imali yamagqwetha abhatalwe ngokupheleleyo ngohlobo kufanele uba abhatalwe ngalo.
And then tata ngicela futhi igama lakho nesibongo ngokugcina.
Ndingusiphethe kaphatsha. Ndingulo wayiphendula enqumke umnwe.
Did you guys get that? Okay, perfect. Enkosi tata.
Sharp.
Sharp. Enkosi ne? Ngicela ubuye la une-voice manje, singaxabani nawe.
That is giving us a interview.
Siphethe Pacha. Mom Gogula, you'll find him. He testified before. He's the one who amputated his toe.
Voice
That's why it's Monday, Manguya. Manguya, otherwise, you don't tell a guy.
We done.
Yes. And it's much I did say, I'm going to try and get everyone, I'm interviews with that guy.